The Dragon's Challenge. The scorching Hong Kong sun burned over the Jun Fan Gung Fu Institute's training yard, where 300 disciples moved in perfect synchronization under the command of their master. Bruce Lee, his naked torso covered in a thin layer of sweat, observed every detail with eyes as sharp as razors. Her movements were precise, her voice steady, but something in the air felt charged, a feeling he couldn't ignore. It was then that the shadow appeared. A tall man, dressed in a faded black GI, entered the courtyard without warning. His footsteps were silent, but the weight of his presence caused the disciples to stop one by one, as if an invisible current was pulling them. The stranger's face was marked by ancient scars, and his eyes, cold as steel, fixed on Bruce with an intensity that made even the most experienced among the students recoil. "Are you the famous Bruce Lee?" The man's voice was hoarse, as if every word was being ripped from his throat. "The man who teaches Westerners martial arts as if they were toys?" Bruce didn't move. I knew this was no ordinary challenge. It was a sentence. "I am," he replied, maintaining a relaxed but alert posture. "And you are?" The stranger smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "They call me Kuroda. I was the disciple of a master you never met, and who would be ashamed to see what you do here." He raised his hand, pointing at the students. 300 disciples, and none of them know the true meaning of the fight. Just pretty choreography to entertain the weak. A murmur ran through the crowd. Bruce felt the weight of the words, but he didn't let them hit him. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if he was about to hear a joke. "And what do you propose, then?" Kuroda didn't respond with words. In a movement so quick it could barely be registered, he rushed forward, grabbing one of the closest disciples, a young man no more than 18 years old, and throwing him against the ground with brutal force. The sound of the impact echoed through the courtyard, and the boy lay still, groaning in pain. Bruce's blood boiled. But before he could react, Kuroda was already in front of him, his fists raised in a posture that Bruce recognized instantly, Okinawan karate, an art that he had studied, but that man mastered with a cruelty that went beyond technique. "Show me what you have, master." Kuroda spat out the last word as if it were an insult. Bruce didn't hesitate. In the blink of an eye, his body moved, a perfect combination of Wing Chun, boxing, and swordsmanship. His first blow was a side kick straight to Kuroda's knee, followed by a sequence of punches that should have knocked down any opponent. But Kuroda was not just any opponent. He dodged the kick with minimal spin, blocked the punches with iron-hard forearms and, in a lightning-fast counterattack, hit Bruce with a punch to the solar plexus that made him stagger. The air escaped his lungs in a single rush, and for a second, the world seemed to spin. Kuroda didn't stop. With inhuman speed, he grabbed Bruce by the neck and lifted him into the air, as if he weighed no more than a child. "Is that all you have?" he growled, lips twisted into a sadistic smile. 300 disciples, and you can't even defend yourself?" The entire courtyard held its breath. Bruce, suspended in the air, felt the blood pounding in his temples. But then, something inside him changed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shame. It was focus. His eyes narrowed, and in a movement that seemed impossible, he twisted his body in the air, using Kuroda's own weight against him. With a precise kick to his opponent's armpit, Bruce freed himself and landed on his feet, already in a fighting position. Kuroda took a step back, surprised. But the surprise only lasted a second. "Now," he grunted, moving forward again. This time, Bruce made no mistakes. Every movement was calculated, every blow an extension of his will. He used the speed of Wing Chun, the power of boxing, and the fluidity of Jeet Kune Do, his own creation. Kuroda blocked, counterattacked, but Bruce was no longer fighting a man. He was fighting an idea, the idea that he was weak. And then, it happened. In an instant, Bruce dodged a wild punch from Kuroda and, with a perfect spin, landed a roundhouse kick that hit the side of his opponent's head. The impact was dry, and Kuroda fell to his knees, stunned. The courtyard erupted in murmurs. Bruce didn't celebrate. There was no triumph in his expression, only a cold calm. "The fight is not about humiliating," he said, his voice firm. "It's about growing up. And you still have a lot to learn." Kuroda looked up, blood dripping from his lip. For a moment, something like respect flashed in his gaze. Then, without a word, he stood up and disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind only the echo of a lesson that none of those present would ever forget. Bruce turned to his disciples, who were watching him with renewed admiration. "Get back to training," he ordered. "And remember, true strength is not in beating others, but in never stopping to overcome yourself." And so, under the scorching Hong Kong sun, the dragon continued to teach. Dragon's legacy. The days that followed were one of respectful silence. Kuroda didn't return to the courtyard, but his absence spoke louder than any provocation. Some of the younger students whispered, speculating whether he had given up or was preparing for a rematch. Bruce, however, wasted no time in speculation. He turned to training with even more intensity, as if every movement was a response not just to Kuroda, but to something bigger, a shadow that was beginning to stretch over Hong Kong. It was Li Wei, the oldest among the disciples, who first noticed the changes. Men in dark suits began to hover around the temple, watching the training with calculating eyes. One of them, a guy with a scar on his chin, approached one morning while Bruce was meditating under the fig tree. "The Dragon Master has many admirers," said the man, his voice oily. "But also enemies. Mr. Kuroda, for example, works for powerful people. People who don't like to be contradicted." Bruce opened his eyes slowly, as if waking up from a deep dream. "And what do you want, exactly?" The man smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "Just convey a message. Mr. Kuroda is not the only one with influential friends. If the dragon wants to continue teaching his lessons, perhaps it would be best to accept a partnership." Before the man could finish, Li Wei stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Bruce raised his hand, stopping him. With one fluid movement, he stood up and faced the messenger. "Tell your bosses that the dragon doesn't bow. And that if they want a lesson, they can come and get it." The man stepped back, the smile fading. Without another word, he turned and disappeared between the alleys. The answer came in the form of fire. That night, while the disciples were sleeping, flames broke out at the back of the temple. Bruce woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of breaking glass. He ran to the courtyard, where he already found Li Wei and the others trying to contain the fire with buckets of water. But the flames spread quickly, fueled by something more than wood, the dark, viscous liquid thrown against the walls. "It's gasoline," shouted one of the students. Bruce wasted no time. He ordered everyone to evacuate the temple, but before he could act, hooded figures appeared from the shadows, blocking the exits. Among them, Kuroda, his face still marked from the last confrontation, but now with an expression of cruel triumph. "You should have accepted the offer," he said, pulling out a knife. "Now you're going to learn the hard way." Bruce didn't move. Behind him, the fire crackled, lighting up the courtyard like a stage. The disciples, outnumbered, positioned themselves around him, ready to fight. But Bruce knew it wasn't a battle he could win with brute force. "You don't understand," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "This isn't about me. It's about what you've become. And what you're willing to destroy to prove a point." Kuroda laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Nice words. Let's see if they burn as well as this place." He advanced, followed by the henchmen. Bruce dodged the first blow easily, but didn't counterattack. Instead, he used his opponent's movement to launch himself towards one of the barrels of water that the disciples had used to put out the fire. With a precise kick, he knocked him down, spilling the liquid across the floor. "Now," he shouted at Li Wei. The disciple understood immediately. He grabbed a makeshift torch and threw it onto the sodden ground. The flames spread in a circle, creating a barrier between Bruce and the attackers. Kuroda stepped back in surprise as his men hesitated. "Do you want to play with fire?" Bruce said, his voice cutting through the crackling flames. Then learn his price. With a quick movement, he grabbed a burning piece of wood and spun it in the air, creating a whirlwind of sparks. The attackers retreated further, frightened. Kuroda, however, was not intimidated. With a scream, he ran towards Bruce, the knife shining in the orange light. It was then that Bruce did something unexpected. Instead of dodging or blocking, he ducked and, with a precise movement, knocked Kuroda off balance, causing him to fall onto his back. The knife flew away. Before the man could get up, Bruce pressed his foot against his chest, immobilizing him. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said, his voice firm. "The strength is not in destroying. It is in knowing when to stop." Kuroda spat out blood but didn't respond. The other henchmen, seeing their leader defeated, began to retreat. The fire was still burning, but the disciples had already controlled the main flames, saving what was left of the temple. The next day, Hong Kong dawned with news of a police raid on a warehouse at the port. Men linked to a criminal organization known as Sombra Negra had been arrested, including its leader, a previously untouchable businessman. Among the seized documents were records of payments to fighters, including Kuroda. Bruce didn't comment. "I knew that the battle against corruption did not end there, but I also knew that a seed had been planted." In the temple courtyard, now marked by the scars of fire, the disciples trained with more determination than ever. And between them, a new figure watched silently. Kuroda. His face still showed the bruises from the confrontation, but his eyes no longer had the shine of arrogance. Just a silent question. Bruce stopped in front of him. "Do you want to train?" Kuroda hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. The dragon smiled. "Then start on your knees. Like everyone else." And so, under the rising sun over Hong Kong, a new lesson began. Not with words, but with actions. Not with victory, but with redemption. And the temple, even injured, remained standing. The weight of the sword. The first months were the most difficult. Kuroda was not like the other disciples, his technique was refined, but his pride, although wounded, insisted on manifesting itself in training. While the others bowed to Bruce's instructions, he hesitated, as if each order was an affront. Until, one morning, the dragon called him aside. "You hold the sword as if it were a trophy," said Bruce, observing the way Kuroda wielded the blade, rigidly, as if he feared she would betray him. "A sword is not made to be displayed. It is made to cut. And to do that, you need to trust whoever wields it." Kuroda didn't respond. But that night, while the others were sleeping, he got up and went out into the courtyard. The full moon illuminated the scars on his temple, and he began training alone, repeating the basic movements, the same ones Bruce had taught him on the first day. Not with the precision of a master, but with the anger of someone who still didn't understand. That's how Mei Ling found him. She didn't say anything. He just picked up a wooden sword and positioned himself in front of him. Kuroda raised his blade, ready for a duel, but Mei Ling didn't attack. Instead, he lowered the gun and waited. "You're not fighting me," she said, calmly. "It's fighting itself." Kuroda gritted his teeth. "And what do you know about it?" Mei Ling smiled sadly. "More than I would like." The ordeal. Winter arrived, and with it, the news, the Serpent Clan had not been destroyed. Just injured. And like a snake coiling before it strikes, they were reorganizing themselves. Bruce knew the final confrontation was inevitable, but this time, it wouldn't be a battle of fire and swords, it would be a war of shadows. "They will not attack the temple," he said to the assembled disciples. "They will attack what keeps us alive. The markets, the ports, the streets. They will try to suffocate us." Kuroda, now quieter but still distant, listened. Since the conversation with Mei Ling, something in him had changed. It wasn't humility, not yet. But a kind of reluctant acceptance. "We need information," Bruce continued. "And to do that, someone will have to infiltrate. The gazes turned to Kuroda. He didn't protest. He just nodded. Between the lines of the serpent. The mission did not go as he expected. Kuroda entered the clan's territory like a ghost, using the same tactics he had once used against Bruce. But this time, there was no pride in his steps. There was just the weight of knowing that if he failed, it wouldn't just be his life at stake, it would be everyone's in the temple. He discovered that the serpent's new leader was not a warrior, but a businessman. A strategist who would rather poison contracts than wield a sword. And that the clan's true power lay not in its fighters, but in its connections, politicians, merchants, even members of the Hong Kong police. When Kuroda returned to the temple, his hands were shaking. Not out of fear, but out of anger. "They're not just criminals," he said, his voice hoarse. "They're a disease. And they spread everywhere." Bruce listened in silence. Then he took out a map of Hong Kong and spread it on the table. "Then let's cut off the serpent's head." The last stand. The trap was set at the port, where the clan's illegal shipments arrived. There would be no swords this time. Just documents, evidence, names. And a single encounter, Bruce, Kuroda, and the leader of the serpent, a man named Lau, who believed himself untouchable. Lau laughed when he saw them. "Do you think you can defeat me with paper and ink?" He lit a cigar, the smell of tobacco mixing with the sea salt. "I have men everywhere. Judges, police, even in your precious temple." Kuroda didn't move. But Bruce smiled. "And we have it." He threw an envelope on the table. Inside, there was no evidence, there was a name. The name of someone Lau didn't expect. The serpent leader's face contorted. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Bruce tilted his head. "Or is it the one thing you always knew could destroy you?" The silence that followed was sharper than any blade. Lau stubbed out his cigar forcefully. "You guys don't understand. It's not just about me. It's about the system. And the system always wins." "Not this time," Kuroda said, for the first time without hesitation. And then, the lights went out. The end of the serpent. When the police arrived, Lau was no longer there. But the documents were there. And with them, the fall of a network that had spanned years. The temple celebrated. But not Bruce. "This is not a victory," he said, scanning the Hong Kong skyline. "It's just the beginning." Kuroda, now with a new scar, this time not from battle, but from choice, understood. "And what do we do now?" Bruce looked at him. And for the first time, there was no challenge in his eyes. Just one question. "Now, we teach." And so, under the same sun that had once witnessed the fire, the temple rose again. Not like a fortress, but like a lighthouse. And Kuroda, the former enemy, became his guardian. Because some battles are not won with swords. They are overcome with choices. The legacy of choice. The first students arrived in silence. They were not hardened warriors, nor mercenaries seeking glory. They were young, some with haunted eyes, others with trembling hands, all marked by something they couldn't name. Bruce watched them from the top of the temple, where the stone walls still held the echo of past fights. Kuroda, at his side, crossed his arms. "They don't know what they're looking for," he murmured. "Yes, you do," Bruce replied. "They just don't have the words for it." The first test was not with blades. It was with a question. "Why did you come?" The answers varied. To not be afraid. To protect those who cannot protect themselves. Because I don't want to run away anymore. Bruce listened to each one, without judgment, until a girl, she couldn't have been more than 16, said something that made Kuroda stiffen. "Because I want to learn how to kill those who deserve to die." The silence that followed was heavy. Bruce didn't look away from her. "And who decides who deserves it?" The girl hesitated. "I." "Then you've already lost before you start." Kuroda expected an explosion, a challenge. But the girl just lowered her head, her fists clenched. Bruce approached. Here, you will learn to see. To hear. To choose. Killing is easy. Living with what you do, that's the difficult thing. The months passed. The temple, once a place of secrets, became a refuge for voices. Kuroda, who had once been a ghost in the shadows, now taught breath control. Bruce, who carried the weight of every battle in his bones, showed how a sword could be used to deflect, not cut. And the students, little by little, understood. But not all. There was one among them, an older man named Rin, who watched everything with a cold smile. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were poison. You are raising lambs, he said one night, while the others were sleeping. The world doesn't need more people who hesitate. Bruce didn't respond. Kuroda, however, stopped next to him. The world needs people who know why they fight. Ron laughed. And you think they'll remember that when the blade is in their necks? Kuroda didn't look away. I remember. The test came without warning. One night, as the full moon bathed the courtyard, Ren attacked. Not with a sword, but with a knife, straight to Bruce's heart. The students screamed. Kuroda moved, but it was too late. The blade stopped inches from Bruce's chest. Not for him. For her. The girl who had once said she wanted to learn how to kill was there, her trembling hand holding Ren's wrist. His eyes burned, not with hate, but with something deeper. I chose, she whispered. Rin tried to break free, but Kuroda immobilized him with a precise blow. Bruce looked at the girl. And now? She took a deep breath. Now, I decide what to do with him. There was no execution. There was no revenge. Run was sent off, marked, but alive. And when he disappeared into the darkness, the girl cried. Not out of relief. Of shame. I almost. But he didn't, Bruce said. That's what matters. Time passed. Some students left, taking with them what they learned. Others stayed, becoming teachers. Kuroda, once an enemy, was now called Sensei. And Bruce, who was once just a man seeking redemption, became something more. A legend that didn't need swords. One morning years later, a messenger arrived at the temple. It brought news from Lao. He wasn't dead. I was free. And he was gathering strength. Kuroda tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword. This time, there will be no documents. There will be no police. Bruce looked at the horizon, where the sun was rising over Hong Kong. This time, there will be no war. And when Lao arrived, it wasn't with an army. It was alone. There was no battle. Just a conversation. You win, Lao said, throwing his sword at Bruce's feet. But the game is not over. Bruce grabbed the gun. It didn't break it. He returned it. It's not a game. It never was. Lao smiled bitterly. So what is it? Bruce looked at the temple, at the students training, at Kuroda, who was watching him with silent respect. A choice. And so, the serpent lay down. Not dead. Tamed. Because some battles are not won with swords. They are overcome with the weight of a lifetime.